can you reflect a little bit more, talk a little bit about what the outcome or the outcomes that you saw from your project? And that's either from outcomes for you as an instructor, as a faculty member, or the impact and outcomes for your students. Let's start with Sudi.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again it's a pleasure and honor to be part of this panel and part of the Provost Diversity Institute. I always look forward to this event at the beginning of summer. And also, I appreciate collaborating with colleagues from the teaching sector. So as articulated in the video, about a week or two before class, I sent my students a survey about that has some questions which included what does an inclusive classroom mean to you, right? And what is your vision of a university class and how I can help you. But in addition to that, I also assigned them a cultural activity, which included asking them to bring few objects to the classroom and build a narrative in terms of how those objects, family narrative, a picture, a necklace, whatever, how those things shape their attitude and define who they are today. And so that exercise really served as a launching pad for creation of a safe and welcoming space for students to be able to share essential items. It was also a clear message for me to the students that your essential items, your beliefs and your attitudes are not left behind when you come to the classroom, but we are going to create space for those things in the classroom. So it really led to the creation of, as also reflected in my students' comments in their evaluations, an engaging environment, better collaboration amongst themselves. And really what I wanted to create again through that exercise is allow students to discover by engaging in that self-discovery, to discover deeper connections with others. Again, the essential items, as we know, are not always visible. So it's only by creating safe spaces for those conversations we get to know about each other. And again, this is something that I obviously learned myself from my upbringing in a small village in the south of Morocco, where my mom had gathered women every day in an open area of our clay house under a pepper tree, gathered women, they broke shells to make argan oil, but they shared their struggles and solutions to problems. Another gathering point in my village that I remember vividly is a well. After at the end of every day when the temperature cooled down, we would take our jugs and go and fill them with water. But it was also a meeting point for us in the village to catch up with each other and see how everyone is doing. And I really wanted to create those similar spaces in the classroom for students to get to know each other better, and most importantly, also really personalize their learning. And some of their comments, for example, with students, everything I learned, I can carry on with for the rest of my life. I truly appreciated the safe space created within the class. I felt that I could share different aspects of my personal culture. This was helped by the fact that the professor himself shared aspects of his own culture and life. I also enjoyed conversation-based nature of the class and hearing from so many different perspectives of the people in the classroom, and let my other colleagues again expand in their project as well.
Great. So creating a space where there's a sense of safety, opportunities for engagement, shared experience, a sense of belonging was really critical for you. And for those of you, we posted in the chat function a link to some of Sudi's work. What is your cultural box? Lori, how about you? What were the outcomes or the consequences that you saw either for you or your students?
Sure, and thank you. Much like Sudi said, it's an honor to be here, and I'm glad to be in conversation with my colleagues. So I think in similar ways, there was this element of trying to create this space for what I like to think of as a very productive discomfort and struggle. And so in the short term, I saw that there was a lot of productive discomfort and struggle as students really considered their role as researchers and asked themselves and each other and me whether they should be engaged in particular projects, how they should be undertaking those projects. And then I really saw sort of as the next step, this really manifesting first-in-class conversation around the role of what it meant to be a qualitative researcher, how that took into account their racial identity, their other identities, how that took into account institutional power, being, a researcher from Pitt, and what that meant about doing research, and in particular, what it meant for doing research in Black and Latinx and Indigenous communities. So I saw that first-in-class conversations where they started to really bring that up as critical to their work and their research design. And then I saw it also in their activity responses and the questions that they were asking me as they struggled with designing their projects, designing their protocols, and made it clear that really at the core of what they were considering, they were, in addition to saying, hey, I want to ask this question, hey, I want to do this research, they were really starting to think about what does it mean to engage in research with marginalized populations? What is the potential for research to exacerbate some of these feelings of marginality? And that was really one of my primary goals. And so seeing that and hearing that from the students was sort of one critical outcome. And then as I've continued, because this was in 2019, and I've since taught the class 2 more times, really the ways students now respond and start to ask questions that sort of push me to draw in additional readings that were not things initially considered in the first iteration. So for instance, this year we really focused on disability justice and brought in a few articles about that, and that wasn't something that we had talked about explicitly in the last 2 iterations of the class. And so I think really developing those relationships with students then allows me to then be pushed further to say, okay, what other aspects of equity and justice are you thinking about in this work, and how can you make that present? And so that's what I experienced, again, from both the student perspective and my own perspective.
Thanks. Zusa?
Thank you. I also would like to thank for being invited to participate in this panel and engage in this discussion with my colleagues here and also with you in the audience. And it's an honor to be part of this discussion, and also receiving the award, which was just real excitement, really recognizing a lot of our students' work, because as you heard in the summary, this project is a peer teaching experience, senior students teaching younger students about unexpected situations in the clinic. And my colleague and I, we guide the students to prepare these experiences for teaching the senior students. And the outcomes, we can see it in several different areas. Some of them are measured in a more scientific sense, if you like that. But some of them are really just more sensed, but are still very important. Every time we have this class, which is coming up in June again, the 4th time, you can just sense it's a mixture of emotions in the classroom. Excitement hearing about something relevant that is applicable for the students' clinical experience, especially that early in their education, they have so many other courses that are a little bit more remote or seem remote for them. With biomedical science is not as directly applicable to their clinical experiences, but also this anxiety, what will await me in the clinic, and what will I do if I face these kind of situations in the clinic? And for them, this is the first time that they may be thinking about it, that, oh, I need to be prepared for responding in a situation that you really cannot be prepared for. And so we can see the first year students, they are really glued to the screen when we show these short little videos. And as they watch their peers talking about their experiences in the clinic, it really is close to them that they hear from a peer and their experiences, because it makes it real to them that, oh, in 2 years, this is what I may experience and I may face. First year students are really engaged and the discussion is lively. So sometimes my measure is the the noise level in the classroom, right? You have to tolerate some chaos and some noise, and sometimes that can be a sign of learning. They can share their own experiences, bring their own experiences, make those connections. You can really see that they are intellectually and emotionally involved, which are really contributing to deep learning. And so this is what happens in the classroom. I wanted to give you a little insight that if you peek into the classroom to the keyhole or step into our Zoom this year, then this is what you would see. But we also have some follow-up assignments that gives us some clue what students learn. And they have an option to write a short reflective journal about their experiences in this discussion. And you can really see that they use critical thinking combined with reflection, which is a very important skill for practitioners and for educators to reflect on their experiences and use it as a tool for synthesis. We can also see how they make the connections and where they see the relevance to patient care and also future applicability to their job as oral healthcare providers. They really appreciate hearing from peers. And so because of this success, when we did this the first time 4 years ago, it really convinced us that we have to keep this in the curriculum. And so the other side of thinking about outcomes, what it means for the senior students who teach this topic. And so every year we recruit 2 students. We just had this discussion with 2 students 2 weeks ago, and they feel really touched. They have vivid memories of this session as a student, what they had 2 years ago. And that's really telling something for me that, this made a lasting impact on them. They remember 2 years later, really the details of this session, which is sometimes can be rare in education. And we always strive for this impact. And they feel honored to be asked to teach this session. So that's really how I like to think about outcomes, both something concrete and measurable, but also the human and emotional side that you more sense in the classroom and in the one-on-one discussions.
Long-term impact is what we all hope for, right? Christine, how about you? What were the impacts that you saw?
Hey, thanks. So I've tried to really make changes in a lot of different ways in all of the courses that I teach, and I teach 4 different upper division classes and also a couple of lower level classes as well. So I feel like I'm constantly doing different things in my courses. One big change is I have students just come up and personally talk to me about how they feel that my class is warm and welcoming, and they love just the friendly atmosphere to my class. So when students personally take the time to talk to me, then I'm like, yes, I know I make a difference. But I have introduced additional assessment questions into my end of year evaluations. So I literally just go and ask all my students, do you feel like my classroom environment is inclusive? So I'm happy to see that in general, the majority of them do. However, not all of them do. So I will say that some of them I'm not reaching, and I'm not exactly sure what to do for that group of students. What is it about my classroom that's not making it to those? I have done a lot of changes in my curriculum to break through to different groups of students. So my wildlife management class this year, which I've been teaching for a long time, I introduced teachings on traditional ecological knowledge. So how indigenous practices that were used to manage the environment, long before Europeans came to the continent, are now being incorporated into wildlife management practices. And what I loved is how, I brought in new reading material, and for my biology students and environmental studies students, they were thrilled to learn about these types of teachings. This was all brand new for them. They'd never been exposed to it in any other class. So I was like, and this was some of the most animated discussions I had in my class. So, it's exciting for me. It forces me out of my box to learn new things, and then it's bringing something new to my students. So, it's really a win-win for all of us. The other component I did was I wrote and published a case study called Do I Belong in STEM? This is really for kind of, you can use in any STEM course, but I really designed it for kind of like students that are new in STEM and maybe uncertain on where they can persevere in the STEM field. Because honestly, this is something all of our STEM kids feel. They are afraid that they are posers, that everything's too hard. They have to take things like chemistry, biology, and organic chemistry, and they feel like they're going to fail. So what this does is really kind of helps them overcome their fears, helps them realize that everyone is feeling the same thing. And at the same time, it's teaching them about diversity and equity issues. It has them look at data in the field and the fact that our field does have a hard time attracting and retaining people from diverse backgrounds. It teaches them critical equity issues. And I gave a lot of background issue for this case study so that you didn't necessarily have to have a lot of training in equity issues to be able to teach this case study. So I was able to convince my department to introduce this to our freshman students this past year. I really wanted to teach it in person myself, but given everything, we just had the students kind of do it independently, and then I assessed their responses. And I was really happy to see that the students, a lot of the students indicated that they felt more capable of succeeding. So they felt more empowered after having gone through the exercise. And then a lot of them felt that they had a better grasp on equity issues. So just from this initial response, I'm saying, you know what, this seems like this, it's just like a one day exercise. They do have to do prep work for it. Seems to be useful for them. So, and this was without even the class guided discussion. So, and I've had other people start using it and giving me good feedback as well. So I'd really like to continue using this in the classroom. So that's been my experience so far.
Thanks. So everybody's used a variety of approaches to evaluating and kind of understanding how the impact that your project has made. Let me follow up. So what would you recommend, particularly to colleagues who may be, anxious, uncertain, or even dubious, as a good starting point for integrating diversity and inclusion into their classrooms and their curricula? Is there some place that you see as a critical starting point or low-hanging fruit? Let's start with Sudi.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Again, and it's enjoyed listening to everyone as well. So the main thing is, I think Lori has brought this in her thing, is really to build relationships with your students. You can't go wrong with that. Once you build a relationship with students, then you create improved empathy, better collaboration, and so on and so forth. But as I mentioned earlier, one thing that I start with about a week before class is a pre-class survey. Questions like as simple as, what does an inclusive classroom mean to you? What is your vision of a university classroom? How can I help? Why are you taking this class? So at least you have to find connection. I even build credit for it. I give about 5 points for people who sort of do the form ahead of time, and so that would be the main thing. But I think the exercise, I was a little bit nervous. Even in my students, to bring items that define who they are and talk about them to class, and I brought mine as well. I think after that first experience becomes really easy, and those conversations were sustained throughout the term, that people were able, because they create sort of like a model, a framework for us to be more engaged with each other. So those are the main thing, and the syllabus, obviously, because again, as instructors, we have so much power. We get to author one of the most important documents on campus, and that is the syllabus. I think including diverse authorship, so students themselves sort of identify with some of the authors. In that, occasionally I will even use an image of an author on the PowerPoint, so really clearly, so we are very explicit about those things. And exercises in class. I mean, one exercise that I use is as simple as, think of a cross-cultural problem you had in the past, define it, what did you learn from it, and even asking a student, how would you teach it to others? Why not? And another one that I included recently was a CAR sort of project collaboration application reflection, where I assigned group project to students, and then they worked with each other. And then I required them to submit 1-page summary to reflect on how did collaboration go. How did you work together? Again, this again another continuation to say describe the challenges that you faced. Again, collaboration is really a big part, and we don't teach it. But I also wanted to start teaching that very explicitly in my classrooms. And then application, how the project you work on, how does it apply to your life? How does it align with your career aspirations? Again, you have to personalize the learning, so so it creates more motivation and that ongoing reflection in the class. I hope that answers your question, Michael. But there is obviously a variety of ways in terms of, but take that first step, and because it is really important. I mean, without creating an inclusive classroom, without students feeling at home, then there isn't, once people feel very comfortable and safe, I think they're much more. I've noticed even attendance during the pandemic for me was between 98 and 100% because students really wanted to be part of that welcoming environment. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Lori, anything to add or build on there? Ways that you would encourage as a starting point?
Absolutely. And I will build on that and also say, I think I'd love to co-teach with Sudi. I feel like we've had the classroom next to each other before, back when we were all in person. And I think we have a lot of overlap in much of what we do. So definitely that relationship building as being critical for being able to engage in any sort of meaningful conversation or learning. I'd add to that also transparency. And so I think part of what Sudi was saying too is doing those same activities, engaging in those same activities, demonstrating where you're struggling, where you may be feeling discomfort with aspects of things that maybe were taught or you're teaching differently than you were taught them, I think can be a critical way of just sort of starting and engaging. I would say also from a broader perspective, as you're thinking about changing your syllabus, first asking yourself about the sort of colonial and racist roots of your particular discipline and topic, because that looks different across areas, and how you can make even that transparent. Because I think a lot of times, particularly, we come through programs or we come through particular disciplines and we're just taught that's the way it is, as opposed to how I'm a sociologist, so how that's a social construction and what that means and what that looks like in terms of whose ideas get to be fact. And then connected to that, when you're looking at your syllabus, whose voices are you amplifying? What ways of knowing are you amplifying? And what's missing, right? And so you start to do that. That can be a really wonderful exercise to do in conjunction with colleagues, but also in conjunction with your students, because they're coming from different backgrounds and different understandings. And so again, one of the points I always make on the top of my syllabus is this is subject to change to meet the needs of everyone in the classroom. And so when we learn something new, we may add something, we may substitute something. And so being transparent in that understanding that hopefully we're all always growing as learners, I think can really help with that. The other thing is, in addition to colleagues here, in addition to the teaching center, the internet can be your friend. I think a lot of folks are really engaged in this movement to revolutionize their syllabus, to think in more anti-racist ways around their syllabus. And so not feeling like you need to be the first one, starting from scratch, but focusing in on whatever your area is. And then I think the points that have been made by some of my colleagues about finding out how students are feeling, you don't have to hold the course of whatever you've decided on the first day and continue it through. You can check in informally. You can do midterm assessments, the teaching centers, and now we have those, but you can also just do your own informally and find out how your students not only are feeling, but what they're struggling with, what they feel supported in, what can be changed. And I think that, all of those things can really help move the class forward and move more toward equity and justice in your teaching and in your classroom.
Thank you. Thanks. Susa, anything to add?
Yeah, I have a couple of points to add or expand. I really like Lori's mention of co-teaching, because having a partner in crime is helpful. Having a sounding board, doing something together, it is simply also just more fun to have a collaborative approach to these initiatives. And And so another point I'd like to make is that in dental schools, there are no teaching assistants. Peer teaching is not very common. It doesn't really happen. So an initiative, what I described, is doesn't come out of the blue. So my suggestion is start small. And no small step is small enough not to be birthed. And just start small here and there, and you can build up a culture where that a bigger initiative is welcome. Because for what I described, I really needed buy-in from students, from my colleagues, from the administration. And right now, we have support from all these different stakeholders for these initiatives that if I just would describe it out of the blue, maybe people would look at it like, what are you talking about? How is this working? And what I mean here is what you need to buy in for, and what we needed buying for, is to really include students' voice in this whole initiative, and also in the curriculum. And I think that's very powerful, especially in topics related to diversity, inclusion, and equity, giving that platform to students to bring their voice in, to help us so that we together can shape the curriculum for future learners. It's really empowering for students, and we can learn a lot as faculty from our students, because they really can tell you what would have their own learning, and they can help shape learning of future students. So that's kind of one bundle that I wanted to bring up. And the other is to think about these topics that you include, how to continue and revisit in the curriculum, throughout the curriculum. So it shouldn't be just a one-time event. We have a colleague who teaches in the third year, and she recognized that these videos can be very helpful in her course, which is behavioral dentistry, to revisit it again, because by that time students really have much more clinical experience. They spend 4 or 5 days in the clinic. 85% of the curriculum is clinical at that time. So students have a different appreciation, and also are able to engage with these videos and topics at a higher cognitive and affective levels. That really helps their learning. And so think about it, how you can use spiral learning to build things into the curriculum later to revisit these topics.
Great, Christine. I'm gonna cheat a little bit, and I'm gonna flavor, or at least attempt to flavor, your response by embedding a little bit of one of the questions that came in, particularly as it relates, commenting about how to effectively add focus on diversity and social justice issues, particularly in courses that are highly STEM focused, that may have a real focus on technical content. Where's a good place to start with that?
No, that's a great question. So how do you make it STEM relevant, or how do you bring in that STEM component? And also, I do want to kind of address to the other question as well, because yeah. I think some of the other, before I leave that, because you guys all had great suggestions, but one of the challenges I found is that you may find that not all of your colleagues are necessarily understanding or completely supportive of your efforts to introduce STEM into your curriculum. And sometimes you have to convince them along the way. So I would say that jump at the training opportunities that are available through Pitt. I did the extended diversity training experience, and that was really transformative because I did it over the course of an entire year, and I was mentored. And so that enabled me to learn much more than just maybe, a particular one-off event here or there, and gave me a lot more confidence as well. And so, and the more people you can surround yourself with who are also engaged in these learning and doing these efforts to transform their curriculum, the more it's going to help you. So that way it can maybe help you work on convincing the people who are more reluctant, and help people move along in understanding the importance of these efforts. Now, in terms of the STEM efforts, honestly, there's just so much out there that is relevant. So I can just give an example. When I'm teaching about genetics and evolution, one small change I made is like, you can just find examples that are relevant. So now in my freshman biology class, I talk about how, how did skin color evolve? Because there's a lot tied up into race and racism in America, and the fact that, oh, you're Black, you're white, you're Hispanic, and what does all that mean? So I talk, well, why do we have people? How did skin color even come about? And I really just talk about, well, if you're more closely, if you evolved in closer proximity to the equator, well, then you have more risk of skin cancer. So you need to have more melanin in your skin. And how did that process occur? Also, how there are people in Africa that actually have white skin because they are in a higher elevation area. So, so it can give a better understanding of what skin color actually mean, how race is really a construct. You can talk about sickle cell disease and how sickle cell disease relates to skin color, proximity in Africa. So you can find diseases that are more relevant to people of different backgrounds and things that are less potentially like things that are less white relevant, for example. You can focus, so a lot of our history in science is focused on white scientists because, and white men in science, because honestly, those were the only people who were allowed to do science for a long time. It was very hard for women of people in color to have any access to science. So even if you're spending a lot of time focusing on those people, you can emphasize, it's not that other people are incapable. It's just that they were excluded from the realm of science, and then make some special effort of saying, hey, let's look at this person who succeeded in this particular area. So yeah, I see the decolonizing curriculum example go up. So, so I sort of have to make a special effort to sometimes incorporate people of color or female scientists because there is so much historic inequity in how science was done. But yeah, you can definitely do it.
There's a question that was specifically for Sudi. My question is, did you find instances, so as you're providing opportunities for students to share more, to in some ways be a little bit more vulnerable in the classroom, did you find instances where students didn't want to share items in their box or questions or activities in the project, finding that it was either too personal or too invasive? Is there a sweet spot? Is there a balance point?
I think that's a great question. And it did come up when I was designing the exercise, asking people to bring 3 or 4 things that define who they are. But I kept it open though. I wasn't very specific about those specific things. I did give them examples, like, that thing could be a piece of jewelry, a necklace, a bracelet, a book, a Bible, it could be whatever. So I did keep it open to help students really feel free to choose to bring items that really we're comfortable bringing. But that's really a very good question. So then, it has to be open and allowing the students a choice on those items. I mean, technically, if we want to really dig more, we could be very specific about specific items. And I think that's where I would see students being uncomfortable.
Another quick question here, and this I'm cognizant of time, so we're coming up near the end of our time. Things do go quickly, don't they? If you did have a question that we don't get to, we'll provide those to the panelists and get back to you. But one last question here before we close. From a lecturer in computer science, Christine alluded to the common dilemma among STEM instructors, whether to invest time to enhance inclusivity in the face of a lot of time to cover content. How do you find the balance? Should the balance be different for lower level students and upper level students? Personally, after an icebreaker session in my first class, all my inclusivity efforts don't require any in-class time investment. Things like inclusive language, inclusive examples, engaging students off time. Is that enough? So there's a lot of packed into that question, but from the group as a whole, kind of, again, how do you find the sweet spot and the balance between the multiple things that you need to accomplish?
Well, I can start. I find that it doesn't, in the initial, like a diversity statement in the first day of class is very little investment. In terms of the examples that you incorporate for all, it doesn't take much more time because often it just means using a more diverse example or a more inclusive example instead of perhaps the traditional textbook example that you might have used. So really it just takes a little more time as a professor to think a little bit more out of the box, but not necessarily more teaching time. Also you can make use of Canvas. So sometimes what I do, rather than put it directly into my lecture classroom, is I'll put an additional, for Women's History Months or Black History Months, I'll be like, hey, look at this woman of science, look at this, this Black man of science who did this amazing thing, and I'll make it relevant, but I won't necessarily put it directly into the lecture that day if I'm running out of time. So you can put you can work equity into various areas. You can also just mass email them. So put it in where you can. That's my recommendation.
Yeah, an important point in the Q&A is to recognize that STEM instructors aren't the only ones who find the challenge in terms of content coverage. That we're all trying to cover more and more content, so it's not just necessarily a STEM problem or challenge. I won't say it's a problem; it's a challenge.
Can I just add on to that?
Sure.
Just to say too that I think part of it is just also reconsidering how do we think of things, right? And so often folks think of like their content as the important stuff they have to cover, and then all of this other stuff as extra, right? And saying, no, actually this is, and I think that's part of what Christine is alluding to as well, that this is an integral part of your content. It is part of the history of your discipline. It is part of, right? And so there's a reason, even down to the fact that STEM related fields sometimes feel like, oh, we are separate because we are completely factually based and not socially constructed in the ways that other things are, that allows this sort of separation that we hopefully now know is just not true, right? Is not an accurate way of portraying it. And so recognizing how that has come to shape your field, and even the ways that we consider outcomes, the testing, all of those sort of things can become an integral part, I think, of the content itself. And then it's not as though those things are running parallel, but they're actually happening, together.